I want to talk about what makes a great recording. I don't mean a great record. Great records, there have been many. Records like the one I mentioned in a previous video, You Can't Always Get What You Want by the Rolling Stones, a great record. But is it a great recording? Because for me, a great recording is when you get home, when you've got your system set up how you want, the room nicely balanced, all the equipment exactly aligned, everything is correct, everything's just hunky-dory, and you put on a great recording, you close your eyes, you sit back, and it's as if the musicians are right there in front of you. They're holographic, they're laid out, you hear every single detail, every nuance of the music. And for me, of course, a great recording can't just be the recording. The music's got to be amazing. It's got to take you somewhere where you didn't think you were headed. There's got to be an emotional roller coaster or something going on there that just inspires you. So I want the combination. And I'm going to talk about two what I would consider to be great recordings later on in the video. And I also would like to invite you to put in the comments what you consider to be great recordings, and maybe we can develop those later on in later videos and certainly in the discussion that will follow. But I thought, first of all, I might like to approach the topic from the viewpoint of a recording engineer, because that's what we're aiming to do, is to make that great recording. And for me, there are four elements that I need to make a great recording. Firstly, it's the location. It's got to be really great location. And what do I mean by a great location? I need the right acoustic. Because I'm recording acoustic instruments, and because I want to capture just not the instruments individually, I want to capture them as an ensemble, because the sound of the violin will combine with the sound of the piano or the cello or whatever, and they will hit, and the waveforms literally collide and form overtones and modes and extra harmonics, which you wouldn't get if you recorded them individually. So the acoustic of the room is really important, not just for me, but for the musicians as well. If the echo is too long, like for example in a chapel, even if you've got one where there's a beautiful echo that just fades away without any reverb coming back, it's just a beautiful fade out. That can be glorious for a solo violin or a solo flute, for example. And if I get the microphone in the right place, the post-production team will have almost nothing to do apart from maybe just master for the format, whether it's for vinyl or CD or whatever. But if, for example, you tried putting an ensemble together with maybe 6 or 7 musicians in the same space, it would become very tiring to listen to, and a lot of the detail would be missing, and it'd be difficult for the musicians to cope with that as well. So you need to get the right acoustic for the right kind of music. So for me, I need the really great location, and it's also got to be quiet with no background noises. Or there's a very famous location in the centre of Brussels, but when the trams go past, you can feel the rumbling underneath. So that's not any use to me. So the other aspect of a great location is it should really be inspirational. It's fantastic when a group of musicians have travelled somewhere and they come to this location and they go, wow, this is where a famous person has recorded before, or it's a famous hall, or it's a beautiful space. And it's no wonder to me that a lot of musicians, when they want to make a CD, like to travel to exotic locations, actually to get away from family and friends and work pressure and switch everything off. Because actually just the traveling, the journey to get to the location can really cement the feeling that something special is going to happen. And it's the recording engineer that needs to capture this, of course. So the great location for me is really important, acoustics and inspirational. So the next thing we need are great instruments, because obviously if the musicians are bringing instruments that are not perfect, and for me the big bane of my life is always the pianos. They can make a twang on a certain note, or the pedals will make a noise, and so I really want a silent piano, of course, in terms of the mechanics of the piano. And often we have to have an engineer there, a specialist, and a tuner full time to make sure that this piano is perfect. And that can be very expensive. So I want to have good instruments, and it might seem a bit obvious this, but it isn't really. I mean, if you take a classical guitarist or even an acoustic guitarist, often a classical guitarist will have a guitar that has a wonderful sound which will project right down into the back of the concert hall. But if you bring that into the studio, often it doesn't kind of work in a smaller location or when the concert hall is empty, and you don't get the subtleties of tones. And sometimes these musicians are lucky enough to have a guitar which they really, really like to play for recording and another one for performance. So the instrument actually is fundamentally important. So that's my second point. But the third point, of course, is I need great musicians, not just great individual musicians with great technique. Of course, we need all of those things, but musicians that really work and play together brilliantly, that anticipate one another, that can have conflicts and share moods and all of those elements that come together to form the chemistry of a great recording. And of course, apart from the musicians, we need great music. We need something inspirational for them to play or for them to create something inspirational from scratch. So there's from a technical point of view, if I've got those things, I've got my equipment in the right place. I like to keep it very, very simple. The microphones with extremely good leads and cables going straight into the recording box. No fiddling around, no fuss. And then we do everything else later on in post-production. And normally, if I've done my homework right, as I said earlier, there's almost nothing to do in post-production. But, of course, in the pop world, it's quite different. The musicians will come to a studio and the engineers will record the instruments separately on separate tracks. Now, in the early days, there was only 2 or 4 tracks, and they're up to 24, and each track is like one part of magnetic tape, and the tape was going past the tape heads at about 15 inches per second, which is about that much. So every second it would fly past the tape head, and the engineer's job was to capture the sound and get it onto the tape. And they had to choose, of course, how to divide the number of instruments up into the number of tracks. So if they only had 4 tracks in the early days, they might say, well, we'll put the bass drum and the bass guitar on track 1, we'll put the rhythm guitars and some other instruments on track 2, and the vocals on track 4, for example. And then they would record them separately and build it up. Now, the thing is, if you've ever worked with magnetic tape of any kind, if you've had the privilege to play and do recordings with magnetic tape, you will have learnt one thing, that if you record onto a brand new tape, it sounds fantastic. But if you record over and over and over again on the same tape, gradually the sound quality drops. And I think this became a problem for a lot of pop groups in the 70s. Because in the 70s, some of these pop groups were earning big money and they were creating big productions, and they were going into recording studios and they were creating the kind of records that had never been made before. Absolutely fantastic records. But what would typically happen is they would lay the tracks down, and then the lead guitarist, for example, wouldn't be happy with the solo. So they would do it over and over and over and over again. And by doing so, the solo might end up being perfect, but the sound quality not. And this was a big problem. And of course, sometimes they would record onto a separate recording machine and then drop that recording on top of the other ones and all sorts of complex things. But it does mean that when you've got a really high quality hi-fi system, you can hear a lot of that distortion and noise, which you wouldn't normally pick up on just a car radio, for example. So it is no surprise to me that many hi-fi enthusiasts tend to move towards jazz, and they listen to more and more jazz because the quality of jazz recordings is often superb. And you may ask the question, well, why would that be? Well, I think it's largely down to the fact that mostly they had such a small budget. They were also used to playing together every night in different bars and clubs and different situations. As I say, they had very little budget, so they would go into the studio and do everything in more or less in one take. And I want to talk to you about one such recording. This is a recording that many people will know. It's a very, very famous recording, A Kind of Blue by Miles Davis. And it was recorded in the Columbia 30th Street studios in New York in 1959. And it was recorded in 2 sessions. I don't know if that was a whole day or a whole night or half a day or whatever, but it was done in 2 sessions. So it's not surprising. They wouldn't have had much time for going over and over and over again. They went into the room, they sat next to each other, just like they would if they were in the club. The engineers got the microphones set up. They were used to this kind of recording technique, and they would just capture what they were playing. And of course, there's an amazing dynamic. But what makes this great is not just the recording quality, is the fact that this transformed the world of jazz. At that moment, Miles Davis was really into bebop, which was a very fast and frantic jazz and very exciting. And suddenly he has this idea to create a kind of blue where it's mellow, it's drawn out, it's based on not just the chord progressions, but the harmonic structures. Everything is changing in the way he's portraying it. And yet, people today will listen to this album and it will just sound like a jazz album, because actually this is what classically most of us think of when we think of jazz. It's a radical recording, recorded in a studio which was very, very famous in New York. Glenn Gould had recorded his Goldberg variations, I think back in '55 in that space. The great artists of the day were recording there. So it must have been very exciting to go along there for Miles Davis and the band, Coltrane and the others, to go in there and record. And they had to get it right first time, which would put a bit of energy into the mix. But let's go from 1959. Today you can hear this on the very best hi-fi system, on vinyl or on CD, and it will sound great. And that's a proof that actually analog recordings are really, really good. However, we come to my next choice, which is completely different. It's Stevie Wonder, and it's called Hotter Than July. I'm sure many people will know this. Now, this was recorded nearly 20 years later in 1980. And Stevie Wonder had a little bit of a dry patch. His previous album, Secret Journey of the Life of Plants or whatever, was not a big commercial success. And he went back to his roots a little bit. He had just met Bob Marley and was really inspired by him. He was thinking about how to approach things differently. And he came across a studio which actually had been abandoned. It used to be for recording radio programs. Even before the days of magnetic tape, they used to record in a completely different way. And all the equipment had been removed from this studio in Los Angeles. And basically what he did was he rented a mobile recording truck and had it parked outside, and they ran cables into this studio space. And he decided to record there. Now, I think when I talk about a great location, it needs to be inspirational and a great acoustic. This studio had a very, very good acoustic, apparently. And it was inspirational to him because one of his, and this is a theory, certainly by Lon Naumann, the engineer at the time, that Nat King Cole had recorded many of his standards there. And Stevie Wonder was a great fan of Nat King Cole, a lot of respect. So he thought, there was a sort of an aura about the place that Stevie tried to fill and did so very successfully. Now, Stevie Wonder was a real fanatic for technology and quality of recordings. And it's absolutely no wonder at all that actually on the album there's a lovely little piece here that says here, "My engineer and I would like to thank the Sony Corporation for their creation of the profound digital audio system which helped us reach the technological dream that once only existed in our minds." And I think that's lovely. Because Sony lent him their, I think the PCM digital recording technology had only just come out, and basically it was a box that converted the audio into digital, and then it recorded onto a Sony videotape, believe it or not. But of course it was just recording dots, light dots in fact, which we would now on computers call bits and bytes. But it meant that you could record over and over and over and over again without losing any quality whatsoever. And if you get hold of this album, this might not be to everyone's taste, indeed A Kind of Blue might not be, but if you just get the track, for example, Do Like You, it's on the second side of this vinyl, and just play that, and you'll be blown away at the sound quality. All the instruments are laid out perfectly. They're dynamic. The drum hits you every time it goes. It's just fantastic. And I listened to it on the CD, which came out later, of course. The digital recording came out, obviously, it was only vinyl at the beginning, when it came out later. But when you listen to it on the CD, of course, it sounds different because it's mastered differently for vinyl than it is for CD. But I think on CD, you get the kind of sound that maybe Stevie Wonder and the engineers were hearing at the time because of the fact that they were could hear it back digitally. And it's bright, it's electric. Maybe it's a little bit too much, but it's exciting. The vinyl maybe for many people will be a better balance. But I think this is a great album or a great recording for other reasons. Another reason for that is a track called Rocket Love. And Rocket Love, here everything is slowed down and it's stretched. And Stevie is singing in a kind of, not a whispering way, but it's very delicate and drawn. And it reminds me a little bit of Billie Holiday, and maybe that's a bit too much of a stretch. But you can also project forward to George Michael and his album Older. And there's some connection there, I'm sure. Well, try it for yourself. So it's inspirational in the sense that it's music and it's moving music in a new direction. It was a great commercial success. It was a platinum selling album. But if you imagine that you are a recording artist, you're a musician, and you want a legacy, well, there's nothing bigger than Hotter Than July for one reason. At the time of making the recording, Stevie Wonder was spending time with Coretta Scott King, and she was the widow of Martin Luther King, and she was concerned about keeping the memory of her husband alive. And I don't know whose idea it was, but certainly Stevie Wonder started campaigning to have a day in commemoration of Martin Luther King, a national holiday. And he actually says here, "Join me in the observation of January 15, 1981 as a national holiday, Stevland Morris, aka Stevie Wonder." And so this came out in 1980, and he's asking for this. Now, it took a couple of years, but after this, the Happy Birthday song on here became a big hit around the world. Actually, Congress agreed to make a national holiday in the memory of Martin Luther King. So just think on that. You think, well, I've made an album that has stretched the boundaries of music, it's used the latest technology, and it's inspired a nation to create a national holiday, which will go on, hopefully, ad infinitum. So I think that classifies as being a great album. But let me know what you think is a great recording, and I mean a recording, and great music according to this. And let's discuss it and see where we are in the chat, or maybe in another video. But to leave you, I thought maybe I would play you out with just a track from one of our artists, the Pearl Acoustics. We sponsor a charity in Belgium, or a not-for-profit organisation we like to call it, called Young Belgian Talent, where we look for outstandingly gifted young classical musicians, and we look after them and sponsor them and help them until the age of 25, from 16 to 25. And Evelyn Graham, a few years back in 2015, was just coming out of the 5 years with us, and we wanted to record a CD for her that she could take out on the road to her live public professional performances. And we offered her a studio, a professional studio, a traditional studio for 2 or 3 days, or a week in a castle, in a castle location, which we had found. And she obviously went for the latter, because there she could stay there, and indeed I stayed there and the other engineers stayed there as well, and she could rehearse all day, every day, in the morning, in the evening, and when she felt she got the piece exactly to the point where it was ready, she could call out and we would come in, hit the buttons and record. And we recorded it on very, very simple equipment, just literally a couple of Audio-Technica microphones and a little Roland R26. It was a bit of an exercise really, but the recording quality is superb, even though I say so myself. I'm saying it's the technology that was superb. But the reason why I want to play out with this, it may not be a great recording in the fact it's going to change the world like the 2 albums that I have suggested, not at all. But we said to her, Evelyn, we don't want to make any corrections to your playing. You can rehearse, you can do whatever you like, and you can record each piece as many times as you like, but each piece has to be recorded in one go. No corrections for errors, no digital faffing around. And the reason why we wanted that was so that later on in life, when she's looking back as an old lady, looking back and playing her CD, that she will know that that's exactly how she played at the time. And we thought if she can take that out onto the road, maybe the audience will even inspire her to get to another level. But she opens this CD, and it's featured a little bit in an earlier video. I apologize for that, but I thought it might be worth coming back to it. And it's Frédéric Chopin's Scherzo No. 2 in B flat minor. And the reason why I'm chosen that is because it's very powerful, it's very dynamic. It will shake the dust out of your loudspeaker systems and off the shelves of the room. But 3 minutes in, there's this beautiful passage where her right hand is so delicate, especially when it repeats again, because it will come in and then there'll be another intermezzo, and then this theme comes back. And it's like all of the emotion that she has within her, everything that's in her life has led up to that point where she's just playing this thing so delicately. And it made me think at the time when we were recording of how maybe Frédéric Chopin was probably feeling when he composed it. Now, I don't know what he was feeling, but I felt there was a connection between the composer, the room, and her and us. And I still feel that when I listen to it at home in my listening room. And I hope that you will enjoy it too. So that's what I'm playing out with Evelyn Graham. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to your comments and to maybe making a video about your great recordings. But until then, enjoy your music, enjoy your hi-fi. It's the music that's important, of course.